In May 1453, the last reigning emperor of Rome died on a crumbling wall, defending a city that had stood for 1100 years. Constantinople did not fall in a year. It did not fall in a month. The greatest siege in medieval history was over in 53 days. And nothing would ever be the same. For over 1,000 years, Constantinople was the heart of the world. Founded by Constantine the Great in 330 AD as the new capital of the Roman Empire, it had outlasted the fall of Rome itself by nearly 1,000 years. 40 miles of fortifications. 3 layers of walls. A harbor sealed by a great iron chain. Greek fire. Imperial gold. And the longest unbroken line of emperors in human history. By the spring of 1453, all of that was gone, except the walls. The empire was a ruin of its former self. Most of its provinces had been lost centuries before. The population of the city had collapsed from 500,000 in its prime to perhaps 50,000 souls. Whole districts inside the walls had been abandoned to fields and vineyards. The double-headed eagle still flew above the palace, but it ruled little more than the city itself and a few scraps of Greece. And outside those walls, a 21-year-old sultan named Mehmed II had brought 80,000 men, 300 ships, and a single, simple ambition. He would take the city no Ottoman had ever taken. He would extinguish Rome. Inside the walls, the last Roman emperor was preparing to die. His name was Constantine XI Palaiologos. He was 48 years old. He wore the purple. He was the 113th man to sit on the throne of the Caesars, in an unbroken line stretching back to Augustus and the year 27 BC. He would also be the last. He had perhaps 7,000 soldiers. Some Genoese mercenaries under a brilliant commander named Giovanni Giustiniani. A handful of Venetians. A few thousand of his own Greek subjects who refused to flee. Against him stood an army more than 10 times his size. The siege began on the 6th of April. And then, the cannon spoke. A Hungarian engineer named Urban had built Mehmed a monster. It was called the Basilica. 18 tons of bronze. 27 feet long. So heavy it took 200 men and 60 oxen to drag it into position. It fired stone balls weighing 600 pounds, projectiles that could be heard a mile away and could shake a man's teeth from his skull. The Theodosian walls were the most formidable fortifications in the medieval world. Built in 413 AD, they had repelled every army that had ever come for them. Avars. Persians. Arabs. Bulgars. Vikings. For 1,040 years, those walls had held. They were not built for cannons. Every day, the Ottoman guns hammered the walls. Every night, the defenders climbed into the rubble with whatever they could find, broken stone, timber beams, wine barrels filled with earth, even the bodies of the dead, and rebuilt by torchlight. Women carried baskets of stone. Priests dug alongside soldiers. The emperor himself walked the breaches, encouraging the exhausted men. It was a race that could not be won. The Ottomans could fire forever. The defenders could not rebuild forever. But Constantine still hoped. A relief fleet was coming from Venice. Reinforcements would arrive from the west. Christendom would not abandon the Second Rome. It would. Venice debated. Genoa hesitated. The Pope demanded that the Greek Church submit to Rome before help would come. The Greek faithful had, in turn, openly preferred the turban of the Sultan to the mitre of a Latin cardinal. 1,100 years of schism had done its work. The relief fleet that did sail arrived too small and too late, and the few hundred men aboard it could not change what was happening on the land walls. Then Mehmed did something no one had ever done. The Golden Horn was the city's natural harbor, a narrow inlet on the city's northern flank, sealed by an iron chain that no fleet had ever broken. Behind that chain, the Byzantines were safe. The walls along the harbor were thinner, lightly defended. If the Ottomans could put ships inside the chain, the city would be attacked from two sides at once. So one night in late April, Mehmed sailed his ships over a mountain. His engineers built a road of greased timber across the hills behind Galata. In a single night, more than 70 ships were dragged overland, pulled by oxen and men, sails set as if they were still at sea, and lowered into the waters of the Golden Horn behind the chain. At dawn, the defenders looked into the harbor and saw an Ottoman fleet that should not have been there. The chain still held. It just no longer mattered. The mood in the city collapsed. Bells tolled. People crowded into the Hagia Sophia to pray. Strange omens were reported. A red mist clung to the dome. The icon of the Virgin slipped from its bearers during a procession. To the Greeks, it felt as if heaven itself was looking away. For 7 more weeks the cannons hammered. The walls grew thinner. The defenders grew fewer. Sleep became a memory. By the 28th of May, the breaches in the land walls were so wide a horse could ride through them. Mehmed gathered his army and announced what every soldier already knew. The next assault would be the last one. That night, Constantinople rode through the city for the final time. He visited his commanders. He prayed in the Hagia Sophia. He took communion alongside the Latins and the Greeks he had spent his reign trying to unite. Witnesses said he wept. Then he went to the walls. He would not leave them again. The final assault began in the dark hours of May 29, 1453. It came in 3 waves. First, Mehmed sent forward his irregulars, lightly armed, expendable. They died in their thousands against the broken outer walls. Then came the Anatolian regulars. They too were thrown back, leaving the ditch piled high with their dead. Then, in the grey hour before dawn, Mehmed sent in his janissaries. These were his elite. His personal corps. The finest soldiers in the world. The fighting was hand to hand. Pikes. Swords. Maces. The defenders, exhausted past human limits, fought from the rubble of their own walls. Constantinople was everywhere, at the gate of St. Romanus, at the breach, at the inner ditch. And then, 2 disasters in a single hour. A small postern gate, called the Kirkaporta, had been left unlocked. A handful of Ottoman soldiers slipped through it, climbed the inner wall, and raised an Ottoman banner on the battlements behind the defenders. At nearly the same moment, the Genoese commander Giustiniani, the soul of the defense, was struck by a bullet or a crossbow bolt and carried, bleeding, from the wall. His men, seeing him fall, broke. The line crumbled. The Janissaries surged through the breach. And the last Roman emperor saw what was coming. He did not run. Witnesses say he tore the purple imperial cloak from his shoulders so that no one would single him out, drew his sword, and charged into the rush of incoming Janissaries. He was last seen swinging at the enemy in the press of bodies at the breach. His body was never found. Some Ottoman sources later claimed he leapt from the walls. Others said he was hacked down in the chaos and lost among the dead. Either way, on the morning of May 29, 1453, the line of Roman emperors that had begun with Augustus, in the year 27 BC, ended in a pile of rubble in a forgotten breach. By midday, Mehmed too rode through the captured city. He rode straight to the Hagia Sophia, dismounted, and walked into the church that had been the spiritual heart of Eastern Christianity for 900 years. He picked up a handful of dust and let it fall over his turban, a gesture of humility before God. Then he ordered the building converted into a mosque. The 1,000-year empire was over. The shock of the fall traveled across Europe faster than any messenger. Kings wept publicly. The Pope called for a new crusade that would never come. Refugees from Constantinople streamed west, scholars, scribes, priests, and they carried with them something more valuable than gold. They carried the libraries of the Greek world. The works of Plato, of Aristotle, of Euclid. Knowledge that had been preserved in Byzantine monasteries for 1,000 years. That knowledge, dropped into the soil of Italy, helped ignite the Renaissance. The other consequence was harder. The Ottoman Empire now controlled the land routes between Europe and the riches of Asia, the silk, the spices, the silver. European merchants and kings began to look elsewhere. They began to look west. 40 years after the fall of Constantinople, a Genoese sailor named Christopher Columbus would sail across the Atlantic in part because the eastern roads were closed. The fall of one city pushed the world into a new age. The Mediterranean became an Ottoman sea. Vienna would be besieged twice in the centuries to come. And the maps of Europe would be redrawn in the wake of what happened on the morning of May 29. And Mehmed II, the 21-year-old Sultan, would be known forever after by a single title, Fatih, the Conqueror. But the man on the wall, the man who chose to die rather than abandon a city that had already lost, he was not a tyrant or a fool. Constantine XI Palaiologos was the last living link to Julius Caesar, to Trajan, to Constantine the Great. When he fell, 1100 years of unbroken Roman political continuity fell with him. The walls of Theodosius are still there. You can walk them today. In parts of the old city, you can still see the very breach where the empire ended. And above it all stands the dome of the Hagia Sophia, completed in 537, witness to coronations and conquests, surviving every empire that ever claimed it. The city did not die. It only changed its name. Constantinople became Istanbul. And the ghost of Rome lives there still. The last Roman emperor has no grave. He has only a wall, a city, and a story that refuses to end. If this changed how you see the end of Rome, subscribe. We reconstruct a lost world every week.